emotions, and anger and frustration is today's topic. So, John, what is anger and frustration?
Well, I guess if you look at it, that both of them are very similar in terms of the emotions that come up. When you're angry and frustrated, it's normally because you can't control something. So if you think you can't control something, or you feel that you're being controlled, then we get angry and frustrated. And the reason for that is that they're learned behaviours. It's a way that we've learned to deal with doing something or not doing something. So either we're at the effect of something and we get angry and frustrated. It all comes down to when you can't control or change something, and it pretty much puts you into a out of your comfort zone. So you start to feel uncomfortable about it, and the reason for that is because with anger and frustration, the energy that is portrayed from those behaviours is control, which is to force, and then the body feels that as abuse. So whether you're abusing someone else by being angry and frustrated with them, or you're angry and frustrated with yourself, it's either projecting abuse or self-abuse. But either way, you end up with abuse. And that's why anger and frustration are very similar, and also why they're quite powerful. And everyone knows what anger and frustration is. We feel it, we've all experienced it, and we know that afterwards we normally feel pretty uncomfortable about it. Or if you've been at the receiving end of it, you feel uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always become about when maybe a boundary's being crossed. As you say, like when you're out of control or you can't control. I think sometimes you might not even have awareness of what that boundary is. So you find yourself feeling angry because something has happened. Maybe you've crossed your own boundary, or someone else has crossed a boundary of yours. You're not even aware of that, but all of a sudden you're experiencing this emotion.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah, and it's because it surprises you. So you haven't got time to think about it, you just react.
Yep.
And that's why, when you look at them, they are learnt behaviours.
Yeah.
Behaviour, because you're not born knowing anger and frustration. We learn it through the people we grow up with. So it can be parents or those that were around, and then even through your adolescent years up into adulthood, we'll still learn elements of those behaviours.
I think it's important too to recognise that whilst maybe it's a negative emotion, essentially what it's doing is trying to keep you safe. So a boundary's been crossed, you're out of control, you feel scared, you feel fearful, the emotion arises, it's fight or flight, I feel angry, but the intention is still good.
Yeah.
The intention is to still keep you safe, and you actually maybe haven't learnt a better way of doing that in that scenario.
Yeah. No,
so I guess we come back to the purpose of what that emotion is for.
Yeah.
Well, it's still that survival instinct of keep me safe.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when you look back on it afterwards, you probably go, oh wow, I probably could have handled it differently. But in that moment, it's just how we auto-respond.
Yeah.
And that's all based on, those learned behaviours are just based upon things that we've experienced in our past, and then all we've experienced and seen it, and how we respond to it, and then it becomes a reoccurring pattern. So every time you feel that the boundary's being crossed, you automatically come up with that behaviour. Because we don't have time to think, well, how would I like to respond to this? We don't sort of take time out. We just auto-respond.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we're unaware that we're doing it. And people will say, oh yeah, he always responds like that, or he's always like that.
He's always angry.
Yeah, he's an angry person. But it's going, okay, but if he's not aware that that's how he's responding, then how does he change it? If you're not aware, you can't change it.
Yes.
So having some awareness that you're being angry or getting frustrated, then you can sort of take time out. So if that was with you, Henry, if you become frustrated or angry and you needed to take time out to do a reset, how would you do it?
I'd probably just come back to my breath, but I've also learned that awareness of the emotion. And so now, like that moment you get that kind of heat start, I can feel it coming. And so I don't buy into it like I used to. Because before, I'd sort of done a lot of this work and come to understand these things, you'd react straight away. and then all of a sudden you find yourself in this space completely. I think for me, it's just coming back to center. So it might be just removing myself from that environment or that situation.
Yep.
Being conscious of not reacting, like wanting to, but just going, I'm not going to, and then just letting it pass. Do something positive, be it make the healthy meal, go for the walk, punch the punching bag, go to the gym.
Yep.
Do something that's constructive. I think we get caught out when it's, hit the bottle or smoke the weed or, reach out to someone you shouldn't be, or I think that's when it becomes a real issue.
Absolutely, because I think you hit the nail on the head there, because if you don't allow the energy to go outward, then you're doing the opposite and you're suppressing it. And then when we suppress the energy of anger and frustration, then it leads us on to other things and creating other things within the body. And one way to look at it is anything that's not eased in the body is dis-ease in the body. So, if we're storing anger and frustration, and my awareness is that anger and frustration is stored on the liver. So if we're storing that energy on there, what are we actually creating in the body? And if your liver is your filter system for your toxins, and it's out of commission, like you turn your pool filter off, your pool pretty quickly goes downhill. Well, the same thing happens to the body. So if the body isn't able to get rid of those toxins, then there's a lot of different ailments and illness and disease that can actually start creating in the body purely from suppressing emotions.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that.
No, and as you know, the body is a vessel, and these things that are being trapped inside have to express themselves, be it in an injury or, as you say, in disease. Like, my understanding of anger is it will normally always manifest into some form of cancer.
It can do. I mean, look, for some people it can do because it is a toxin, but for other people it can show up as Lyme's disease, Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disorder. It can also be hit the lymphatics, which may turn to cancer, but it can also create a lot of other diseases as well. And a lot of the autoimmune diseases are created through suppression of anger or being at the effect of anger.
Yeah.
That's just my awareness on people that I've worked with, and you find out what are the things that they've really dealt with and what are the things that they've really suppressed.
Yes.
And then and then you start linking up the times that when they've gone through all those emotions, and then how it's played out in the health and wellness of their life and how their body's starting to deteriorate. Whether it be an ache or a pain that comes up in their body, or does it express itself as some sort of disease? It turns into some sort of disease, and in a lot of cases it can be cancer.
Yeah, I think the suppressing is really interesting. I know on this sort of journey I've been on, something that was brought to me was I was suppressing a lot of anger towards someone else, and I wasn't even aware. I didn't even know. And they said, "Are you angry at this person?" I said, "Well, I'm not." I said, "But you are." And sort of as you dive into that, it's, "Oh my goodness, I am." So you're walking around doing life, experiencing road rage or small things are ticking you off, and you don't understand it. But it's because it's actually got nothing to do with the event.
Yeah.
It's suppressed.
Absolutely.
It's in the vessel, and so it's these little things that are triggering you to visit that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about it this way, your subconscious is storing everything that's happened to you. So any past trauma that you've had is stored, and what's the connection then is between the trauma and the emotion that you felt at the time. So if the trauma brought up anger or the anger brought up a trauma, either one could trigger it. So you could be out somewhere and something happens that triggers the emotion or triggers the behavior. But because they're connected, it'll come up. So it's actually finding, well, what is it? What is the trigger? What's triggering this? And are there a series of triggers? Because once you break off the connection between the emotion and the event, then the trigger goes. The trigger won't be there. Because if you've got no emotional attachment to it, and then you don't have an emotional response, then you can actually deal with it. But if you just automatically respond, and it's normally with, say, anger or frustration,
you're in it.
You're in it. And when that's it, then you've got to deal with, wow, now I'm in anger.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, you've got to do a reset. You've somehow got to calm yourself down to reset yourself before you move on.
So how do you know that you're angry? What are your triggers?
I actually feel the energy actually inside of me. I can feel, it's almost like you feel like you're winding up. It's almost like a pressure cooker, and you go whoop before you, and then the exploding is normally in the voice, or it might be the physical, you know?
Yeah.
But you can feel it, because it's almost like if someone's doing something, you think either one, they're personally attacking me, or a beloved, or something, to me. Whereas in actual fact, if I sat back and went, wow, isn't it interesting that they're acting this way rather than me responding?
Yeah.
And see, because once you then become aware that that's how you have been responding, when you have the awareness of that, then you can sort of take your own little time out, be in allowance or no point of view of what they're saying, being or doing. Then you can go, interesting. Not buy into it, not create a polarity, not aligning and agreeing or resisting and reacting to what they're being or doing. So that way you go, wow, because it's whatever's going on for them, well, why would I want that to trigger something for me? Because what I've got going on for me is completely different to what's going on for them, but I'm allowing them to bring up something in me.
Yeah.
So once you're aware that you have those behaviours, then you can actually put things in place to, one, deal with it so you're not in it. Then, because if you're not stuck with it, then you don't have to deal with it because it's not there. So one is, it's the avoidance. It's being aware of that and not taking it on. Because you might have elements in you already that need to be cleared. You might have some, like you say, you might have some suppressed anger that you haven't dealt with, and then something triggers it, and it has nothing to do with what your suppression is, but it's the energy that's the same. It's the energy of control, force, abuse.
Okay.
Like you were saying before, when you feel like your boundaries have been violated, or you're just going into protection mode to keep yourself safe or to make others safe, and then if you think about it, whatever we're protecting ourselves against, we're almost trying to match the energy by being the same. Because if someone's attacking, then rather than going into a defensive mode and not worrying or an avoidance mode, we actually attack back. So then you've got like
threat.
Yeah. So then it's like two North Pole magnets, and they're going to repel.
Yeah.
Really, if you can take the time out and go, wow, isn't this interesting? And then get yourself away from that environment, then you don't have to deal. You don't have to deal with any of that because it's not yours. It's all their stuff. You don't have to deal with it because if they're angry and frustrated, why would you want to take it on?
Of course.
But if you can, so avoidance is a great tool to, but you can only avoid it if you're aware of it. And that's why I think if you go into being aware of the good, the bad, and the ugly, so being aware of everything, then you can actually be aware that someone is being ugly, so that you don't have to actually take it on.
Yeah.
But if you've got polarities on what ugly is, then quite often we match it and we fire back. And some people may not fire back in exactly the same way, but their way of firing back might be the silent treatment.
Well, this is interesting, isn't it, in terms of like how do we project our emotions and then how are they received? You could be projecting anger at me,
Yep.
but if my whole childhood was angry, I could almost perceive that as love.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so it gets very confusing. And this is where I think people become the body becomes addicted to the chemicals that have been released from these emotional states. And so creating that self-awareness, it's easy to say, I'll just be aware of it, but actually breaking those habits and breaking those cycles, that takes a lot of work.
Oh, it does.
If you've had, anger in your life up until you were 30, that's not a quick fix.
No. Oh, no. Well, that's, you think about it. It's 30 years of being around anger, being aware of anger. So it becomes something that's common in your life.
You become comfortable in it.
You do.
And so you don't even realize that it's an issue.
No. And then you don't even realize that you're functioning with anger and how it impacts on those around you.
So if you are someone that's maybe fed up with themselves, you're operating from subpar, how would you start to cultivate that self-awareness, or how would you create that space for you to see what's really going on?
Well, Look, everyone's different, but for me personally, it's like you said before. It's pretty much taking time out and asking myself, what is it that I don't think I can change? Because that's ridiculous. Because we pretty much have the power to change anything. But what happens is we self-internalize the question rather than, what if you could externalize the question? What if you could say, well, what am I trying to change here that I haven't had awareness of? So pretty much, rather than going into our own google.com and regurgitating, thinking that we know how to solve this, sometimes it's better if you ask the question externally about, well, what's required to change this? What could I do differently here? What else is possible I've never imagined or never thought of? You're going out of your head. And then it's like when you can't remember someone's name, when you actually become aware, you'll remember the person's name and you won't even be thinking about the person. But it's the same when you ask a question about what else could I do differently here, rather than get angry, what else could I do differently? Or what could I do to change this so I don't get angry and frustrated with it? When you're not focused on that, then you allow yourself to receive. And that's the receiving the good, the bad and the ugly. Because you have to be willing to receive it all. Because if you're not willing to receive it all, then how can you determine what's going to work for you?
Yeah.
And then also it's, wow, well, I've done this before and I've always done anger, but has it really worked for me? Like you were saying, if you've done 30 years of anger and it hasn't worked for you, you got to go, well, what am I going to change here?
Yeah.
And you can't just turn off the anger.
No.
But you've got to be aware, okay, I'm starting to get angry, do I need to do a bit of wussa or something, to mellow myself down?
Yeah. I think, for me, it's very much just that, whoa, how's this making me feel?
Yeah.
And I don't even have to label it as anger. It's either good or bad. You know if something's making you feel good or bad. And it's just like, oof, this isn't okay.
And you can even ask, well, is it mine or someone else's? Like, is it my anger or is it someone else's anger that I'm feeling?
Well, that's a whole nother.
Because what if it's someone else's? If it's someone else's anger, then you can't change that. So if it's not yours, you got to go, wow. Well, you can just return it wherever it came from. But that, as you say, is a whole different subject. But in that moment of taking that time out and going, well, who does this belong to? Rather than reacting, you've actually put up like a little interlude to give you a little bit of space. And just in that moment, you can take a couple of breaths to go, well, I'm just going to calm myself down. I'm not going to let this fire me up, and I'm not going to react the way that I normally react.
Because it's exhausting.
Absolutely. And you feel like crap afterwards. And then you go into other emotions like regret and guilt because, why did I act that way?
Well, maybe we can do regret and guilt next.
Sounds like a good idea.
I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, please shoot them through. Thank you.